there be peace. Let there be peace. Let there be peace. Let there be peace. In my heart and in my hands, let there be peace. I have dreams and I have plans, let there be peace. I have a flower, I hold the key, let it begin with me. Let there be joy.
I've crammed a whole lot into the service, so here we go. I have two readings. The first is an excerpt from Reverend James Ford's God is One, Francis David, Reformation, Unitarianism, and some of its possible significance for contemporary UUs. Together with learning of Transylvanian Unitarians, we have discovered one of the most compelling spiritual figures, frankly, of world religion. Here we are presented with a fierce intellect and a questing spirit, a religious leader and spiritual and social rebel with, in my opinion, he writes, more substance, certainly more intellectual and spiritual rigor than either Calvin or Luther or any of the rest of that Reformation gang. We have found, thanks to these connections with Hungarian-speaking Unitarians, not just a distant cousin of whom we can be proud, but an exemplar, a pointer of the way, a teacher and a guide on our own way. We have discovered Francis David, and with him we get a cast of characters and a story that more truly than most is our story. Francis David was born at the beginning of the 16th century in Kolosovar, today Cluj, in the Kingdom or Principality of Transylvania. Kingdom from the perspective of the Transylvanians themselves, principality, in fact, as they were within the thrall of the Ottoman Empire. His father was a shoemaker, but his mother came from Hungarian nobility, so he had social access. His intellectual capacities were recognized early on, and patrons supported his education, even sending him to Wittenberg for 4 years for advanced studies, after which he was ordained a Catholic priest. Spiritually restless and intellectually rigorous, he chafed at the strictures of the Catholic faith, eventually converting to Lutheranism. He quickly was elected the Lutheran bishop for Transylvania. Under the influence of George Biandrada, physician to the king and a significant spiritual intellect in his own right, David continued to wrestle with his faith and eventually declared for the more rationalist Calvinism, then quickly becoming the Calvinist bishop of Transylvania. He sounds like a good UU, right? He's like done all the things. The evolution of his faith continued. He and Dr. Biandrada found themselves deeply influenced by the Spanish anti-Trinitarian Michael Servetus and the great Dutch humanist philosopher Erasmus. Among the problems for David was the lack of any scriptural clarity around the nature of the Holy Spirit, and with that, the whole idea of God being described as a Trinity. In the meantime, Dr. Biandrada arranged for his friend to be appointed court preacher. His command of the scriptures, his eloquence both in pulpit and in debate, and with his ability to speak with equal eloquence in Hungarian, German, and Latin, it appears no one was able to meet him head-to-head in disputation. And significantly, gradually, well, not that gradually, Francis David's preaching and eloquence became even more and more obviously anti-Trinitarian. These questions and disputes gradually spread beyond the court. It may be hard in our time and place to understand how powerful and compelling these questions were, or the physical danger that accompanied questioning such bedrock assumptions, an area that neither Luther nor Calvin ever dared go. Reverend Ford continues with some information about the Edict of Toleration, the Edict of Torda, notes that there were mysterious circumstances around King John's death, and that he was succeeded by a Catholic. Persecution began then when David's thinking continued to evolve. Biandrada was afraid for their new church and joined with others to denounce David, who was tried and convicted of heresy. He died in prison shortly thereafter. And the second reading, excerpts from UU World's The Edict of Torda, A Landmark in Religious Freedom by Reverend Eric Cherry. There is so much that the idea that the Edict of Torda points to in our own tradition that we continue to rely on. The grounding commitment that faith is not endowed with purpose by governments or empires, but by the sacred, the holy. That a free pulpit and a free pew are necessities for free religious communities. Even the stirrings of our own commitment to resist authoritarianism as a religious practice is signaled in the edict. This anniversary is an opportunity to look back and remember foundations and commitments that can be touchstones for the faithful struggle ahead. The Edict of Torda is one of those reliable sources of power and inspiration. There is no need to romanticize history, though. It is clear to 21st century UUs that the Edict of Torda did not go far enough, but it was an important step on a pathway of reform and freedom that continues today. Radical in its time, he was martyred for his steadfast commitment to the work of unending reformation. David's particular commitment provides inspiration, not a destination, in our own. Beyond these matters of faith and practice, the anniversary of the Edict of Torda, celebrated in 2018, calls American Unitarian Universalists to know themselves better by celebrating the history of the world's first Unitarian churches. Our international partners in Transylvania, Hungary, and around the world understand the edict as their moment of birth and establishment, as a basic part of their spiritual DNA. Let us take this anniversary as a chance to understand our partners and our history more completely, to celebrate the radical reform spirit that is at the basis of the Edict of Torda, and to translate that spirit to lives and ministries of purpose today. The 16th century was a wild time for religion in Europe. In 1517, Martin Luther, a German teacher and monk, accidentally set off the Protestant Reformation when he famously nailed his 95 Theses, the disputation on the power of indulgences, to the door of a church in Wittenberg. While some of these theses proposed were controversial to church teachings, others were simply an attempt to call the church back to its own values. Specifically, Luther took great issue with the too common practice of selling indulgences. When people sinned and conveyed that to a priest in this era, they were given the option of paying for full or partial forgiveness of their sins. That is, people could pay a fee to reduce or cancel their penance. Some of this was to support wars that the church had initiated, such as the Crusades, to support other church needs, and of course there were priests or higher-ups just lining their own pockets. What was worse was this practice of selling indulgences, these fees to reduce or cancel penance, had evolved into a related practice, that of buying indulgences for loved ones who were presumably in purgatory to release them from their church-mandated penance in the afterlife. Now, Catholic clergy were offended by Luther's accusations, and this began an unraveling of the Catholic Church's hold. Luther himself continued to evolve in his thinking from his initial critiques, realizing that salvation is free and requires nothing, least of all money, to get it. While the criticism of indulgences and some of the theology related to them were within the church's doctrine and practice, the underlying theology that guided Luther is why he was later excommunicated. His understanding of salvation was radical, and related to it was the belief that there needed to be no intermediary between people and God, a role that the church had long assumed for itself. Luther's challenges to the Catholic Church on the matter of indulgences set off a series of challenges about practices and theology, from questioning infant baptisms to the Holy Communion to Henry VIII's choice to create a new church when the Pope would not grant him an annulment for the first of his marriages. So this is what was happening in Europe in the decades that were leading up to the Edict of Torda, which was signed in 1568. By that time, Catholicism was still popular, but now it also had to contend with Lutheranism, Calvinism, and other denominations to seat their pews and fill their coffers. And not surprisingly, as new faiths emerged and were establishing themselves, there was a lot of fighting and politicking and trying to claim territory. Did I mention fighting? Both over theological and spiritual matters, as well as physical ones. It's like when you've got a sibling who's pretty similar to you, but enough different and you bicker all the time, like my sister and I did. My parents were always like, please stop, just stop. And of course, all of this was happening since these denominations were all basically less than 50 years old, figuring out who they were and who they wanted to be. So this is the stage for the Edict of Torda. Well, it's part of the stage for the Edict of Torda. Another piece of the stage is what Reverend Dr. Susan Ritchie noticed when looking at the geography, history, and empire. All of these things also mattered. Ritchie realized that all of what I shared about these religions were part of the story, but something still tugged at the corner of her mind. She's a historian, so. Ritchie writes that Transylvanian Unitarianism in the context of the edict in her book, Children of the Same God, the historical relationship between Unitarianism, Judaism, and Islam. So I fully nerded out on this service, and I've got maps. So if we could see the first map.
We do not have those slides.
Oh, they didn't get in there? Okay. Well, I'm sorry. I have maps, but you don't. So, okay. So Europe mostly looks like Europe, except Germany and Austria are really big, and they're in the Holy Roman Empire. And sort of below them is the Ottoman Empire that covers a lot of the coastal areas through Europe, the Middle East, and Northern Africa. And then over here, you've got the Polish and Lithuanian Commonwealth. And in between there, you've got the land through the forest, right? Transylvania's in there. And it's kind of like on the outskirts of everything. So what Ritchie realized had been rather overlooked by those who have told the story of how the edict came to be, is that Transylvania was part of the Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Empire existed from 1299 until 1918. It was dismantled at the end of World War I. And like other large empires, the Ottomans granted varying degrees of autonomy to their subject nations, especially at a place like Transylvania, which was kind of like on the outskirts for them. And like they owned it, but they didn't really own it, you know? Throughout the 16th century, the Ottoman Empire was fighting with neighbors as they sought to expand. In 1566, the empire reached its peak size geographically. There was no mass effort to forcibly convert people to Islam or Christianity as there had been in other parts of Europe, thinking about the Spanish Inquisition. So Spain is the prime example of that, but it happened elsewhere too. So, for example, the capital of the Ottoman Empire was for most of its history Istanbul or Constantinople. There's probably a song in your head now. The former center of Christianity for the Orthodox. The Ottomans took Constantinople and renamed it more than 100 years before the Edict of Torda. And while there was some effort at Islamicizing it, most people were largely left in peace to practice their faith, whether it was Christian of whatever variety, Jewish or Muslim. It's entirely possible that all of this was more about the Ottoman approach to governance than it was to anything else. Like the Romans, who largely allowed people to do their own thing in the places they lived, the Ottomans also did. So Christianity, Judaism, and Islam coexisted under the Ottoman Empire as it was in Transylvania. And all three faiths coexisting matters not only for the Edict of Torda, but also the way that Unitarianism evolved in Transylvania. As Ritchie writes, the grounds for religious toleration affirmed by the Edict of Torda were prepared by the everyday lives of actual people who were already living in a multi-religious way. It was common for interreligious marriages to take place and for families to then be multi-religious. One example that she gives is a family where the boys were raised under one religion and the girls were raised under the other of the parents' religions. There was even a small group of Jews in Transylvania called Zeke Jews who had been Unitarians and had adopted Jewish practice as an extension of their Protestant convictions. I don't really understand that, but that's what they did. They represent the only instance of an entire community adopting Judaism without historic or genealogical ties to the tradition, according to Ritchie. The Unitarian and Jewish connection, unfortunately, though, reinforced both anti-Unitarian and anti-Jewish persecution. All of this was possible in part because Transylvania is kind of that geographical borderland, surrounded by various Christianities, Judaism sprinkled throughout, and Islam as another neighbor and the religion of those in power. Because of its geography not being central in Europe, or the centers of strong religious identity, like the Vatican in Rome, or Calvin's Geneva, or Luther's Germany, Transylvania was seen where people of different backgrounds came together, where progressivism was actually welcomed. Ritchie notes, positioned on the doctrinal border of Christianity, Unitarianism often found that its nearest theological kin were not Christian. Unitarian identity in Europe emerged as a defense of the inherent kinship between Christianity, Islam, and Judaism. Thus, Unitarianism was multicultural and multi-religious from its beginning. Michael Servetus was one of our theological ancestors who was executed by order of John Calvin in 1553, so a little before the edict was issued. But his work influenced some in Transylvania and many elsewhere. He argued against the Trinity, a wildly and decidedly unpopular argument in that era of Europe, partly because the Trinity is an offensive doctrine for Jews and then Muslims. Bless you. The idea of the Trinity actually separates Christians from their Abrahamic faith siblings. A generation of theologians followed Servetus's thinking, though, including, bless you, Giorgio di Andrada, a court physician who had considerable influence on Francis David, to whom the words, "We need not think alike to love alike," are attributed, although he never said that. Andrada was interested in creating an intentional Unitarian church from the various anti-Trinitarian theologies around. Imagine, there were a lot of those too. So Andrada both influenced the young King John, as did his mother, Queen Isabella, who was also influenced by them. As noted in the Time for All Ages of the story, she was raised well by her parents with a mind for fairness and humanism, the teachings of the Greeks and Romans. To whatever degree it would help the budding Unitarian movement in Transylvania that they shared the same one God as the Muslims in the Ottoman Empire, as well as that of Jews. Monotheism gave subjects access to legal and protection and legal rights in the empire. So they had to pay a tax, but in return they were basically treated the same as the Muslim subjects. Stephen Prothero, in his book, God is Not One, refers to Christianity as a soft monotheism, and that there is a belief in one God and multiple manifestations of them. This is considered idolatry or blasphemy according to traditional Jewish and Muslim beliefs. This was kind of the point. The Council of Nicaea in 325 was meant to set Christianity apart from Judaism. So Unitarianism in this particular setting was perceived as distinct from other forms of Christianity. Toleration then, Ritchie notes, derived from Ottoman policy, Ottoman bureaucratic structure, and Ottoman interpretation of Islam, which was in most instances stunningly liberal, cosmopolitan, and pluralistic. Truth be told, Islam was in some ways a more progressive ally than other Christian sects, not only because of their mutual toleration and enmeshment, but also because Islam had no need to fight as Christian sects were doing amongst themselves. What Ritchie learned in her research is that the connection between Unitarians and Muslims has been both overlooked and equally deleted. There's the long-time strict division of West and East that has been fabricated, but also the strict separation of Christianity and Islam. In addition, Hungarian church historians have vehemently denied a relationship existing between the two religions. Turkey and Hungary have historically been enemies, and it has been hard for them to think of Ottoman core Turks as something other than just violent and oppressive. While today we might look at this history and the intermixing to be beautiful and rich, at the time it was not experienced that way by many Europeans. They were afraid of the Ottomans and Islam because people fear what they don't know or understand. The Ottomans had been expanding their empire into Europe, and this was also a cause for deep concern. And because of the Unitarian interest in and engagement with Muslims, they were also perceived as a potential threat by extension. So we got it from all sides. Our European siblings in faith have been around long before our own Unitarianism emerged in the US in the late 1700s. But for the most part, we didn't really have a relationship with them until the 1990s, when the UUA's Partner Church program was launched. The Partner Church program was a collaboration that matched mostly American congregations with others in Transylvania and later around the world. The impact of our Transylvania siblings in faith have had on our American faith in these last decades is important. They have helped us to understand ourselves in new ways with new possibilities. Instead of focusing on just not being Trinitarian because it's not scripturally founded, Transylvanian Unitarians invite us to consider not being Trinitarian because it distances us from our Abrahamic faith siblings that our faith has historically shared. Pluralism has a rich legacy in our U.S. American Unitarian Universalist heritage that I'll get more into a little bit next time, which is in 2 weeks. But our European siblings have brought us so much, and they have brought us deep connections with Judaism and Islam that we didn't have otherwise. They have also given us heroes that are our own, as well as a long, difficult, honorable history of resistance and community that offer us instruction for these challenging times we find ourselves in now. It is worth remembering the gifts the Edict of Torda gave to Transylvania and Europe, but also worth remembering the lessons and stories of how it came to be. How we live our lives matters. When we celebrate diversity, theological evolution, living our values, and honoring both the past and future, we are remembering and practicing the best of our faith. If you would please rise and join me in singing our closing hymn, Come Thou Fount of Every Blessing. It will be on the screens. Or, looks like maybe we're doing We'll Build the Land. That's okay too.